The purpose of FEDRA is to present the audience with a question, and that question is, what is survival worth? This is a question that dominates the entire story of The Last of Us from beginning to end. Just about every single character in the game has a different answer. Joel says that survival is worth killing for. Riley says that survival is worth fighting for, as long as we get to be with the ones we love. On the opposite end of that spectrum, Bill says that survival is worth fighting for, even if it means you have to be totally alone and isolated. Henry says that survival is only worth anything if he can protect his brother too. David says that survival is worth murder and cannibalism. And finally, Marlene and the Fireflies say that the ultimate survival of humanity is worth killing Ellie for. But it is FEDRA who first introduced this theme to the story, and theirs is the first answer we encounter. To see that answer, we are going to watch a cutscene, and it's the only scene we're going to watch in this entire video. And it's probably not the scene you think it's going to be. As you watch, I want you to think about a question. Is survival really worth this? Can survival be worth something this horrific? Okay, here it is.
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help.
Stop!
Please. It's my daughter. I think her leg is broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians on the outer perimeter. Please advise.
Daddy, what about Uncle Tommy?
We're gonna get you to safety and go back for him, okay?
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Somebody, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit. Please don't. Oh, no. Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. God. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah.
That was, of course, the final scene of the game's prologue. Joel and his daughter have just barely escaped the beginning of the outbreak. We've already watched dozens of people get killed by zombies at this point, and you think that they've reached safety. Now, this soldier probably is not literally a FEDRA agent. It's not clear to me whether FEDRA even existed as an agency at this point in the story. But his actions, along with the decisions of whoever is giving him his orders, are symbolic of the kind of survival that FEDRA is offering. The player will encounter many different kinds of violence in this game. There is the frenzied, mindless, animalistic violence of the infected, which is violence without any purpose at all, just pure destruction and chaos. Then there are the vicious, murderous killings of the hunters, who are willing to brutally kill anyone in the name of survival. The murder of innocents, of children, just to get their hands on a little bit of food, just to live for one more day. There's the self-defense of Joel and Ellie, which is probably the most justified violence in the game, but often still brutal and bloody. And finally, there's the violence of FEDRA, the Federal Disaster Response Agency. This is government violence. This is violent policy determined by a bureaucracy. This is violence by committee. This is violence with a rigid chain of command. There is an emotional distance in the violence that FEDRA commits. The violence of David is very intimate in a way. He is going to kill Ellie because he chooses to. He is going to do it himself. He will wield the knife. He will strangle her with his own hands. But in the case of FEDRA, the soldiers are not actually the ones making the decision. The soldiers are just the tools of whoever is actually in power. Whoever is making the choice to kill gets to do so from a distance, from the other end of a radio. They don't have to personally witness the violence their orders and their policies beget. I've always thought it was an interesting choice by the developers to never reveal anything about FEDRA's commanders. We don't know who actually runs FEDRA. We don't even know the names of the the people in charge. If you hate FEDRA, there is no single person to focus that hatred upon. No evil emperor, no Darth Vader. They're presented as just a mass of faceless and nameless stormtroopers. But let me get back to that question I asked earlier. Is survival really worth gunning down Joel and his daughter, two survivors, two refugees who are fleeing to safety, a defenseless father and his helpless child? Well, I think The Last of Us tries to complicate our understanding of the word survival. There are actually many different kinds of survival, as well as many different kinds of deaths in this game. Joel technically survived the Cordyceps plague, only to become a bitter, cynical, lonely man with no purpose, no family, and no joy. It's not until he opens himself up to Ellie that he really starts to actually live again, to feel a sense of purpose and connection. I think the game is very critical of the kind of survival that FEDRA is offering. That bitter, cynical, miserable survival without really living. The world they create is not worth killing children for. And to examine that world in depth, we have to fast forward in the story out of the prologue and into the present day. Okay, so FEDRA is the Federal Disaster Response Agency. It is an agency of the United States federal government, tasked with managing the American response to the Cordyceps plague. Eventually, in the name of survival, they seized total power over all the government's resources, over the entire military. They declared martial law, they suspended all other laws, agencies, and branches. They suspended the Constitution itself. They created quarantine zones in cities throughout the United States. These quarantine zones are surrounded by barriers and barbed wire, by tanks and machine guns, to protect those living inside from both the infected and from other human survivors. The quarantine zones themselves are heavily militarized, full of guarded checkpoints, armed soldiers, and military equipment. And they rule over the quarantine zones with an iron fist. They rule over every aspect of citizens' lives. They determine when you get food and how much. They determine when you work and what kind of work you do, and how much you get paid for it. They determine where you're allowed to live, where you're allowed to go, what times of day you are allowed to be outside. The player's first introduction to FEDRA comes very early in the game. Joel and Tess are walking through a street in the Boston quarantine zone, and the player will pass by these FEDRA soldiers. Apparently, this building has been condemned and declared off limits. Several people are dragged out of the building by armed soldiers and held at gunpoint. The soldiers press some kind of electronic device, almost like a thermometer, against the prisoners' necks. This device is meant to determine whether a person has been infected with the Cordyceps virus. And when their device beeps, they immediately murder that person, right there on the street, in full view of anyone who might be watching, like it's the most normal thing in the world. They do it instantly, no hesitation whatsoever. Seeing this, another prisoner tries to make a run for it, and instead of just capturing him or trying any other alternative, the soldiers immediately gun him down too. Another callous killing on the streets of Boston. In this scene, the writers are communicating to the player that in this world, FEDRA and their soldiers have absolute control over life and death. If that little device makes the wrong noise, you are dead. If you run when you shouldn't, you are dead. You go somewhere they tell you not to go, you break any little stringent rule, and you are dead. This is a very extreme form of tyranny. The most terrifying thing about that little virus detecting device is that no one in the game ever discusses how accurate the machine actually is. Like, what if it made a mistake? Testing for diseases is not a simple process. One of those little devices experiences an error, gets the wrong wire crossed, and you could be killed for it instantly. FEDRA's introduction in the game always reminds me of Half-Life 2, of City 17 and the Combine. Half-Life 2 is set in and around a city whose only name is City 17, an urban dystopia ruled over by the militaristic and tyrannical Combine. And the Combine's tyranny is introduced to the player in a very similar way. Just like in The Last of Us, the player will explore this drab, ruined, oppressive urban environment. filled with armed soldiers and military equipment and guarded checkpoints. As you move through this linear space, you will witness the Combine soldiers mistreating and even murdering random people for breaking their stringent rules. In some ways, FEDRA and the Combine are very similar kinds of antagonists. They are both oppressive, militaristic, totalitarian regimes ruling over a ruined wasteland Earth. Of course, the Combine is an interdimensional alien empire with very obscure and mysterious motivations, while FEDRA is simply an American government agency with a very clear and specific singular motivation. And that motivation is survival. That's the real difference between an antagonist like the Combine, who are just evil, and FEDRA, who have a goal that the audience could support. There's an actual moral justification for FEDRA's actions, and that is what makes FEDRA an interesting antagonist. They don't want power. They do not oppress people just for the fun of it. They did not murder that supposedly infected person we discussed earlier out of spite. FEDRA have an ostensibly noble goal. Their extreme methods are protecting hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of innocent lives. We know so little about the early days of the plague that it is impossible to really judge FEDRA's actions. Maybe there really was no other way, no other choice. Maybe FEDRA is personally responsible for the survival of almost everyone left alive in the United States today. But again, this is survival without really living. The game presents life in Boston as being miserable, grim, and oppressive. There is no joy here, no color, no warmth. This might as well just be another form of death, a slow stagnation where people live pointless and unhappy lives. When Joel and Ellie leave Boston, the setting is suddenly filled with color and life. So much greenery, so much nature. Out here, as dangerous as it is, at least our characters are free. For all the tragedy, there are moments of joy. There is beauty. Through the change in visuals, the art and sound design, the change in atmosphere when our characters leave the Boston quarantine zone, the game is implicitly criticizing FEDRA's goals and actions. Something else interesting to me is the way FEDRA just sort of disappears in this story as the game progresses. At the beginning of the game, they're presented as if they're going to be the main antagonists of the story. The tyrannical government, the oppressive soldiers. They are shown to be powerful and dangerous, with a stranglehold on the ruins of America. These are the enemies we face for the first act of the game. Our heroes have to run and hide from them. They wound Marlene, the leader of the brave resistance, slaughter the rebellion. They nearly capture the good guys and actually do kill one of our protagonists. But then, after this very imposing introduction, by the time we reach Pittsburgh, FEDRA has effectively vanished from the story. Every other quarantine zone we encounter is overrun and abandoned. FEDRA is revealed to be a paper tiger. FEDRA, along with their stagnant and grim version of survival, is ultimately irrelevant to this story. Their cause is flawed, their bastions unimpressive, and their soldiers as weak as their ideals. The Last of Us does offer an alternative to FEDRA's grim version of survival, and it's the same alternative I discussed in my video on the Fireflies. That alternative is Jackson, Wyoming, the safest and most pleasant settlement we encounter in the game. Jackson is proof that FEDRA's extreme measures are not necessary for survival. The people of Jackson are able to build a safe, stable, and self-sustaining community without government tyranny, without martial law, without soldiers gunning people down in the streets. There is another path forward, where life is more than just survival at any cost, where life still has purpose, when individuals work together to build something bigger than themselves. In a dozen different ways, the developers communicate to the player that FEDRA has gotten it all wrong, which is why they turn out to be an ultimately irrelevant faction in the story. But we cannot finish our discussion of FEDRA until we talk about the Left Behind DLC, because in this extra story, there is an attempt by the writers to humanize the FEDRA soldiers. While Ellie explores the mall searching for medicine for a wounded Joel, she can find a series of text and audio logs left behind by a squad of stranded FEDRA soldiers. In these logs, the soldiers start out just as nameless, bureaucratic, and inhuman as their fellow soldiers in the main story, but gradually these 4 squad members become more and more human, more and more sympathetic, and finally very tragic. Okay, so a group of 4 FEDRA soldiers were riding aboard this Black Hawk helicopter. Then the helicopter crashed into this mall, stranding the 3 survivors here. The first text log can be found beside this soldier's corpse. It reads, "Chief Warrant Officer Larry Caulfield died bravely this afternoon. We were flying back to the QZ when our patient turned. It must have been spores because none of us saw the bite. The patient broke the restraints and fell upon pilot W.O. Sean Brendan. Even with the helicopter spinning out of control, Officer Caulfield fought the infected patient, saving our lives. We crashed into a rural Colorado mall. Private Eugene Ellis, Officer Larry Caulfield, and I were the only survivors. In subduing the infected, Officer Caulfield was bitten on the neck. He immediately showed us the bite and accepted his fate. I executed the infection protocol before Officer Caulfield could turn into an infected. May he rest in peace. Captain Regan, 4th Infantry Division, Denver QZ." Okay, so this note is written in cold, bureaucratic military language. It's extremely terse and to the point. There's no emotion or humanity in its descriptions, which perfectly matches how FEDRA personnel have been characterized in the game. They are soldiers, they follow orders, they do what they're told. They kill without hesitation and without conscience. Caulfield was bitten. Protocol dictates that he must be killed immediately. Like a robot, he accepts his fate, dies. Just like that. No drama, no theatrics, just soldiers doing their jobs. And so now there are only 2 survivors left, Captain Regan and Private Eugene Ellis. But in the next text log, it will be revealed that these soldiers are much more human and much more emotional beings than these dry military descriptions let on. It can be found in an old dried up pool of blood. It reads, "With supplies running low, Private Eugene Ellis and I entered the loading dock in hopes of procuring additional rations. We were caught off guard when a group of roughly half a dozen Stage 2s attacked us. We neutralized the threat, but not before Ellis was bitten. After a long, heated debate, where Private Ellis tried to take his own life, I incapacitated him. I then took it upon myself to break protocol. I isolated the infection with a tourniquet. I gathered and cleaned a surgical saw from the abandoned triage. I injected Private Ellis with morphine before amputating his arm several inches above the bite. I am confident that once the private regains consciousness, he'll be clear of the cordyceps infection. Captain Regan Francis." Alright, so this note is still written in that very cold and dry military language, but this time there's a lot more obvious emotion between the lines. For the first time ever, we hear of a FEDRA soldier breaking protocol, breaking the rules, not following orders. And they do it to save the life of a beloved comrade. These were dire and terrible circumstances. Captain Regan was almost left totally alone, almost lost her last friend in the world, and she said no. She chose to do something drastic, something desperate to save that friend's life, disregarding her training and orders. Just imagine how dramatic this scene must have been. The furious argument these 2 must have had, knocking Ellis unconscious, sawing off his arm. And notice how the signature has changed. The last note ended with, "Captain Regan, 4th Infantry Division, Denver QZ." But now, it's Captain Regan Francis, and the extra bits have been lost. She's not just a part of the 4th Infantry Division, Denver QZ anymore. She's just herself, alone, making her own decisions. In the next text log, the filter of that bureaucratic military language will drop away entirely, and Regan will tell us what she really thinks and how she really feels. It can be found near a generator, and it reads, "Private Ellis has taken a turn for the worse. He's burning up and he couldn't keep any of his food down. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe the amputation was too late. Maybe when I'm not watching he'll turn and The infection protocol. We did what we had to Officer Caulfield. Who the hell am I kidding? We murdered Larry. Ellis held him down while I shot him like a fucking dog. I can't get his screams out of my head. Regan, please. I still have time. Don't do this. Ellis, what have we done? What if I just leave? What if I just make a run for it? I'm sorry, Ellis. Regan. This log is so filled with emotion. There is so much doubt and worry and anxiety. This is a soldier who no longer believes in her orders, who has lost all confidence in herself, whose identity as a soldier and commander is collapsing. She is becoming an individual again. And here the true emotional drama of that first text log is revealed. That first log described the death of Caulfield in very cold and terse terms, everything according to protocol. But that language was hiding a very traumatic and ugly event, when these friends, these companions turned on each other, one of them begging for his life for a little more time, murdered by his own comrades. At the end, Regan chooses to abandon Ellis, which in essence is a death sentence. For her own survival, Regan is choosing to kill another one of her friends. It's a choice that we as the audience can understand, but geez, is it rough. Just imagine what it would feel like to have to make that decision, to leave a friend behind to die. And this log ends simply with the name Regan. No captain, no squad. She's not a soldier anymore, she's just Regan, truly alone now. The next log is an audio log, which means we get to hear Regan's voice for the first time, and so not only read about her emotions, but hear the emotions in her voice. So let's listen to that together now. Here it is.
Well, Ellis, I found a couple recorders. Maybe we can, document this whole thing. It gives me an excuse to talk. Even if it is to myself. You hit me pretty hard the other night. Not gonna lie, that shit still stings. I was trying to feed you. You actually accused me of stealing your food. You got any idea how hungry I am? I mean, I know it's the fever talking, but I left you, Hell, I even managed to get a good 10 miles out before turning back around. It's like you say. We sleep together, we eat together, we shit together. This unit is a family. So no. I'm not going anywhere. God. Just let him pull through. This thing is stupid.
Regan has made a really heroic choice here. She has chosen to sacrifice her own safety, her own chance to escape, to stay with Ellis, to care for him, to stick by his side even if he is ungrateful. This decision parallels Ellie's own decision to stay with Joel. In this DLC episode, Ellie is also choosing the only family she has left, to sacrifice her own safety and well-being to care for someone important to her. And that's ultimately what the DLC is about. It's about relationships. It's about how important human connection is to the survival of these characters. Ellie needs Joel, Joel needs Ellie, and Regan needs Ellis. Next, beside yet another soldier's corpse, we can find this photo. The squad whose story we've been following, taken in happier times, when the four were all alive and still together. It's extraordinary that these are FEDRA soldiers, those jerks who are trying to kill our protagonists at the start of the game. As players, we shouldn't care what happens to these soldiers. They are the enemy. We've killed dozens of these guys. But these text and audio logs have done such a good job telling their story, of humanizing these characters, that it feels so tragic shock when you find this corpse and this photo. When you discover that Regan didn't make it, despite her heroic choice to stay by her companion's side, it all ended in tragedy. There's one last audio log to listen to, one final corpse in a ventilation shaft. This time we're going to hear the voice of Ellis, which is a really interesting choice. This whole time we've been hearing the story from Regan's perspective. Here at the end we'll finally learn how Ellis feels. So here it is.
It's fucking freezing in here. God. I'm the last surviving member of my crew. And I'm gonna die in an air duct. Regan, what did you expect me to do? I was bitten, and it was only a matter of time before she killed me. Even though I wasn't infected. She said she wasn't going to, but I could see through her eyes. Why else would she reach for her gun? Why the fuck did she reach for her gun? I was just talking to her. If she wasn't lying, I wouldn't have to hit. She would have shot me. I'm sure of it. Then why'd she keep you alive all this time, Ellis? Huh? It doesn't matter. I shot her. I ran away. I fought and escaped those fucking things, and in the process, the sutures on my goddamn stump ripped open. I'm bleeding to death, and I can't sew it back up. Not with one arm. I can't make the fucking knot. Regan. So cold. I think I'll just rest.
The details of Regan's death are very vague. It's clear that Ellis killed her. It seems that there was an argument or disagreement of some kind, but we don't know any details. Without her, he was unable to sew up the sutures on his arm, and so bled to death. In this setting, a character cannot survive alone. Bill is the exception that proves the rule. Otherwise, isolation in The Last of Us means death. Loneliness is destruction. As soon as Ellis was alone, he was already dead. During a conversation with Sam, Ellie reveals that her greatest fear is being left alone. Well, this is what she's afraid of, dying utterly alone in some forgotten ventilation shaft. All of her friends and family already gone. It was a lack of trust that killed Ellis and Regan. He just could not trust her anymore, not after they had murdered Caulfield together. The bonds that kept them together were permanently severed with that act. And this too reflects Ellie's own story. After she discovers that Joel lied to her about the Fireflies, she cannot trust him anymore. A lack of trust destroys their relationship in the same way that it destroys Ellis and Regan's lives. FEDRA are a very simple antagonist, who basically disappear after the first act of the game, but they're also a very important antagonist, who confront the player with the main themes of the story right from the beginning. And in the end, thanks to these text and audio logs added in the DLC, they are transformed into a deeply human antagonist, whose flaws and mistakes closely mirror those of our protagonists. This video ends my examination of the villains of The Last of Us Part 1. Next time I will be examining the themes of fate and destiny in The Last of Us, and contrasting that with how God of War Ragnarok deals with those same themes, examining how these two games actually complement each other in a really fascinating way, so please look forward to that.